due to the fact that my overall frontline update was just too long because I had to spend so much time on the Solidar claims, I've split this into two videos. So this is the first video to look at the front lines everywhere but Solidar and Bakhmut. And then later, just very shortly, I'll bring out my Solidar and Bakhmut video, which will just be concentrating on that, because otherwise it's just too unwieldy. I don't like it when it goes on for that long for my frontline one. So I apologize if that annoys you, but that's just the way it is. Thank you. Enjoy or not. Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video, a frontline update for the 8th of January 2023 with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. Before we go to the front lines, let's get to the overnight and other news. And first, as per usual, we'll go to the official figures that Ukraine released for the losses of the Russians. All the usual caveats apply, and there are no Russian equivalent figures. 430 liquidated personnel. That is, again, fairly low in comparison to what it has been. 3 tanks, 5 APCs, 3 artillery systems, 5 drones, 3 vehicles and other fuel tanks, and 1 piece of special equipment. So fairly kind of average day, I would guess, for losses there. Not much more to say on that. On the Ukrainian side, there's another Ukrainian loss in terms of aircraft. Here's a MiG-29 shot down near Kurakhove. Apparently, unconfirmed reports say it was actually down by friendly fire from a SAM air defense system. I do wonder, like, how this doesn't happen more often. Like, I don't. I'd have to look at exactly how the systems work and how you register your own air activity and also drone activity. There must be so many different units using different drones. It must be a nightmare to know that to know whose drone is whose, let alone whose aircraft is whose. So yeah, this kind of stuff is going to happen, but it's obviously a really big loss for the Ukrainians there. That's another aircraft, and I don't know whether the crew member went down as well. It turned out that an ammo depot was hit and completely destroyed. So says no reports of. I think where is this? I think this is possibly in. Oh yeah, Melitopol. So in fact, this is the Hydromash factory in Melitopol. Russians use the area as barracks, and videos confirms a lot of secondary explosions. So some big hits on Melitopol last night, as well as Crimea. Reports of explosions again there in Jankoy, which is, just to let you know, roundabout here. In fact, exactly there. So that's Jankoy, and there's an air base, I think, there, as well as other sort of collections of stuff. So that's been hit or possibly hit. That could have been drones taken out of the sky. Don't know for sure. In Luhansk, partisans blew up the main pipeline in occupied Lutogino. The section of the railway tracks nearby was used by the Russians to transport military equipment, personnel, and BC. And in the reverse direction, they were transporting stolen Ukrainian grain to Russia. So that's obviously not going to happen for the foreseeable future. It's good that the partisans are doing that. Logistics are super important to take out. On the flip side, the Russians are, or were last night, and I talked about this in terms of their missile stocks. They have a shed load of S-300s that they can use, some 8,000, I think, that they can use for in their ground-to-ground capacity. So don't be surprised if you see an awful lot of S-300 missiles striking at the moment, and this is what's happened. So Kharkiv has been hit by S-300s, I think, elsewhere. I know that Kramatorsk as well has been hit. In fact, let's go to that now. So Kramatorsk was hit. Just to let you know where Donetsk and Kramatorsk are. Where Kramatorsk is. They're just behind the lines of Bakhmut. They're these important cities here of Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and you've got Siversk, which is also important behind the front lines. And Kramatorsk was badly hit, and then Kharkiv as well with S-300s. And we move on. Kherson was hit pretty badly with incendiary incendiary munitions, which are pretty terrible. I mean, all weapons are terrible, aren't they? You kind of have arbitrary dividing lines between certain types of weapons, and there's a bit of a philosophical argument you can talk about with regard to chemical weapons. Why did we get so uptight about chemical weapons getting used in Syria, and yet we kind of turn a blind eye to like mass deaths through bombings and missiles? It's an interesting argument as to there not really being a category difference between the two. If there was the Makivka HIMARS hit from the other night that caused the deaths of so many Russians that now it seems, the numbers are kind of ticking up there. The numbers that we hear coming out of how many died. And there was some video footage of a guy who had something like, I don't know, 75% burns. He ended up dying, and the video was his last words. And you're thinking, that's terrible. That's absolutely horrible. What's the difference between that and a chemical weapon? And actually, really relatively little. It dies of intense burns after a prolonged period of suffering. And I mean, it's horrible. War is horrible. But there you go. Okay, according to Bild, high-ranking Greek officials offer that the promised martyrs to be sent to Ukraine instead of Greece. Greece does not need them urgently and can wait. So this might speed up martyrs getting to Ukraine. They were promised a whole bunch previously by Germany in some kind of deal, but actually they say we don't need them as much as Ukraine needs them at the moment. Send them to Ukraine. On the flip side, trainload of T-62s arriving in Melitopol. Not sure from where, but that's just within the last hour. That photo, I think, has come out. So yeah, there's stuff moving around. And talking about stuff moving around, according to Belarusian rail monitors, it's now believed that the number of Russian forces in Belarus has increased over the last 30 days from around 9,000 to 18 to 20,000. So they have doubled, with those numbers expecting to continue growing in the coming weeks. So probably as a result of the sort of mass mobilization that happened at the end of last year, we are seeing troops either being trained or trained troops being sent to Belarus. And the Wagner Group, and I meant to say this the last couple of days, but now it's kind of definitely official. Lots of people are saying, oh, Wagner are only really interested in Bakhmut because of the salt mines. And this is part of what they've done in Africa. So if you look at their activities in Africa, basically they go and do stuff, but they then skim off the top of all these natural resources, whether it be sort of diamonds or any other kind of natural resources they can get their hands on. So the founder of Russia's Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Russian oligarch and Putin confidant and former convict, said on January the 7th that he wanted to capture Ukraine's eastern city of Bakhmut for its resources and underground cities. So there you go. That's why they are fighting so hard for Bakhmut. It's not something I've mentioned previously, but something I'd heard a lot about only over the last couple of days. But of course, it makes a lot of sense. And now you're seeing them fight in Solidar over those salt mines. Just in my Columbo moment, the other thing I forgot to say is that, and there are several claims about this, refrigerated trains are arriving in Russia full of bodies of dead soldiers, and these are arriving apparently in Rostov. That is obviously in Russia, and it indicates the amount of dead that the Russians are having and having to deal with. Anyway, front lines, we're going to go, as always, to the Kupiansk-Svatiove-Kreminna front line first. Not a great amount of detail coming out of here. Positional battles as per normal, and the usual contenders for places where there is activity. So the first thing to say, this is just north of Kupiansk here. We have Liman-Pershi, Vilshana, and Pershi-Travaneri. The Russians are claiming that the Ukrainians have attacked towards Sinkivka. Well, if they're attacking towards Sinkivka, that would indicate that they don't control Sinkivka. But as far as I understand, they do control Sinkivka. I know it's near Liman-Pershi, and there's differing accounts as to who controls Liman-Pershi. So that's interesting. Not quite sure what to make of that. As we come further down, repelled attacks towards Novoselivska. This is in the Stanomikivka area. So Novoselivska is just west of Kuzumivka. Russians are attacking towards there and apparently towards Stanomikivka. That could mean they're attacking anywhere down this front. This is the name that's every day is mentioned. The Russians attacking towards Stanomikivka, and I never quite know exactly what that means, even though it's the most common thing to hear. So that's kind of, as you can see here from ISW. Rebar, for example, as a Russian source, mentions nothing. It only talks about Solidar today and only on Telegram. Ukrainian Resistance Center reported that a Russian engineering and sapper unit arrived in Svatova to examine the options for potentially blowing the dam of a nearby reservoir in order to slow Ukrainian advances in the Svatova area, which I find fairly interesting. Defmon says the usual suspects, as I say, Stanomikivka and Makivka, repulsed attacks around there. No significant change. Satellite image of Novoselivska from this morning. I think the shelling pattern gives a pretty good idea about the Ukrainian progress. That could mean one of two things, actually. It could mean they are making progress there, and you can tell that because it's being shelled, or it's still being shelled, so they're not really making very much progress. Considering, I would say the latter personally, considering there's still We're still talking about Novoselivsk after all this time. There's still presence there, and they still can't break through to Kuzmivka. So things are slow here. Ground is now sort of frozen. I think there's snow around various places, so you will see equipment be able to be moved with greater ease. As we come further down south, is Makivka that has been mentioned. Not an awful lot to be said about Ploshchanka or Chervonopipivka. I'm just going to bring you on to Kenneth Runt, who often translates the words of um, the well, there's often translation of a Swedish guy who is fighting out there, who says, and take this with a pinch of salt, but first-hand report at least. Good news on all fronts. Let's start with Svatova. There, our recon troops have been watching a weapons depot that the Russians have been replenishing for weeks. I don't know if this is the same one that was hit um, a couple of days back, like 3 or 4 days ago, because he talks about in the last 24 hours. Then in the last 24 hours, it was time to use HIMARS and drones to knock out the depot, and we did. Nothing left but a pile of gravel. In addition, it's estimated there are up to 500 dead and wounded Russians and a lot of high-ranking officers. So that's definitely some new kind of detail. Or I don't think that's the same one that was hit previously, but it could be. Another consequence is that the Russians' expected offensive in this area is now out of date. Yesterday, I expected Dibrova to be under our control, and so it was. Ours advanced 4 kilometers and knocked out the Russians out of position, because Myrna is also mostly under our control. So that's a good bit of detail if it is true. Caveat. We have also put Kreminna under artillery fire, and all indications are that the Russians are starting to feel really bad there. It's likely that they will retreat from Kreminna in the near future. The large concentration of Russian troops in Luhansk has not moved against Kreminna, which means that they will concentrate on defending Luhansk. The war is probably over for Moscow if Luhansk comes under our control. I'd probably agree with that. And as far as going further down south, Defmon says the Ukrainians have repulsed attacks in the area of Dibrova and Bilorivka. There is a video of a tank battle with 3 Russian tanks supposedly attacking 2 Ukrainian tanks. Image 2 shows roughly what I believe was going on in the video below. So this is, and I think at least if it's the same video, it is the same video. I'm pretty sure one of the Ukrainian tanks gets taken out here. But so there's fighting going on around Dibrova, but the other source that then says, Dibrova is now under Ukrainian control, and no report says yet another strong signal that Dibrova is under Ukrainian control, because Myrna east of Dibrova is disputed. So that fits exactly with what Kenneth was saying, is disputed, as Ukrainian 140th Recon Marine units were confirmed shelling Russian positions just south of that town. So a bit of geolocation going on there. And this is from a Russian source, so Syriac Maps. Meanwhile, on the Luhansk front, the Ukrainian army launched a new attack east of the town of Torska. That's much further to the west than Kreminna and the forest, and took control over new positions around the road, thus arriving within a few hundred meters from Dibrova. So this is kind of begrudging acceptance that they have done well to get, from Torska all the way to Dibrova. They've been around here, for some time now. There has been to and fro in this pocket just north of Dibrova, but they've been south of Dibrova and controlling that, as this map kind of accepts, for some time. Although it doesn't have Dibrova under the Ukrainian control here, a lot of the other sources are. So I would say that Dibrova could well now be under Ukrainian control, with Kupiansk possibly partially contested. I'm going to move my red lines back later on today to probably look something like this, and the Ukrainian lines back to fit in line with that. So basically, Ukraine controls, I would say, probably that. Anyway, repelled attacks around Bilorivka, and we'll come south now. This would be where the Bakhmut section is, but you can watch that later. Let's move on further down south. Okay, let's move on to Avdivka and Marinka, where pretty much the same thing is happening to both of these places. So there are reports as we come further down south here, and here's Avdivka. There are reports from Russian military blogger sources that they're trying to bypass Avdivka with an attack, by trying to do this to the north, behind or through Krasnohorivka. and then to the south through Pervomaisky. So there's a possibly renewed attempts at the moment on Pervomaisky, and just leaving it quite quiet here, because if you can do this and succeed in that, which is obvious, is what we've been saying for a long time, then you cut off the logistics. It's too difficult to try and burst through these urban areas and have great success there, whereas arguably it's easier to take out open land and these smaller settlements to both to the north and to the south. And actually, that is also the claim. But having said that, still fairly quiet repulse attacks around Pervomaisky, as far as I understand. They're trying to do the same with Marinka as well. There's claims that actually they're trying to bypass the bypass. I'm just trying to get my writing thing here. Oh, what have I done? Ugh. Ah, I've got rid of my map. Brilliant. Don't panic, Mr. Mannering. All I was trying to do was this. So, there's a claim that the Russians are actually trying to bypass fortifications in the south of Marinka, and this is why they're concentrating on trying to take Pobieda. And there are all these sort of fortifications here. Open ground isn't necessarily easier when the Ukrainians have had 8 years to build, 9 years coming on for 9 years to build entrenchments and fortifications in these areas of open ground. So it can be just as difficult, arguably. But their attempts to bypass the fortification in Marinka will make an encirclement look something like that. But other than that, not too much to report. So after that, really, there's not a lot to report. No extensive fighting along the southern Donetsk front, along the Zaporizhia front, and along the Kherson front. There's the usual shelling, and there are HIMARS sort of attacks. There's still fallout coming out from the attack on Tokmak the other day, huge amounts of deaths. There's Radensk around here, lots of hits that sometimes it takes days for the details to come through. But that's a frontline update for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, and share. If you want to help my channel out, there are all the ways that you can do in the description below, and it's hugely appreciated. Of course it is. And there's also uasupporter.com/ATP, and that /ATP bit gives my channel a little bit of commission if you decide to buy any of the stash that's available here. So for example, you can get a man's sweatshirt. If you sweat a lot and you need a shirt, this is what you wear. So you can show your support for Ukraine whilst also showing a little bit of support for my channel. That's hugely appreciated. Anyway, thank you. Take care. I'll see you later. Or no, I won't see you, but I'll talk to you later.